And I was the chair of the Department of Social Sciences at the New School, the founding division of the university, for 10 years. And I had the pleasure and adventures of being Toby's chair, because she gave, as many of you probably know, wonderful, wonderful documentary film courses, as she does now. And many of you probably know that she and her husband Dan are citizens of the world. But when I became chair, I guess 13 years ago, I didn't know that. All that I knew about Toby and her film courses was that they had huge enrollments. We closed registration at about 120 most years, and students were begging to get in. So that was one thing I knew. I also knew that students worshipped Toby, but also what she brought them in the films that she showed. But I also was told that it was impossible ever to get a course description from her in time for the first course bulletin deadline. And so when I was appointed chair, the dean said to me, "It is your job to make Toby put in her syllabus with the list of movies that she's actually going to show on time." And so I thought I had a conversation with Toby, and the first deadline for the bulletin copy comes, and I don't have anything. And Toby is somewhere. Well, it took me 3 semesters to figure out that what was going on, and the reason that Toby couldn't give me a written syllabus was because she and Dan were flying around, seeing the movies that she was going to screen, and she was deciding what she was going to screen. And in fact, I remember getting a fax from Berlin, from Cannes, and once from someplace along the Black Sea. So it was very, very exotic and exciting. Then there were the Tuesday afternoons, which is when Toby gives her film courses. And I learned that if Toby showed up about an hour and a half before her class at my office, that there was some adventure, and there was certainly a story for her appearance. And the first time this happened, she came into my office, the door was open, and she sat down and she said, "Gina, do you have any money?" I said, I don't know how much, what for. She said, and she whispered, she said, "There's somebody from China downstairs whom I've brought, and he shouldn't be here. He's a dissident. He's a dissident director, and he brought me a copy of his new film that was going to be screened at Lincoln Center, I think.
At the Museum of Modern Art.
At the Museum of Modern Art." She said,
Oh, yeah.
"So I brought him from the airport, and I need to give him some money because he's in New York illegally." She said, "And I'm going to screen his film today at 1 o'clock?"
It was 12:30.
12:30. And can we get some money for him, for his honorarium, but also so he can eat and be in a hotel room? So we spent the next hour trying to figure that out and moving the financial people at the New School to actually cough up some cash. And then a few years later, Toby showed up at my office about an hour and a half before, and it was, I began to wait to see whether Toby would show up. And she had a short, older woman with her. And she said, "May my friend and I come in to your office?" And I said, "Of course." And the woman sat down and she said, "Agnes Varda, I would like you to meet my friend and chair, Gina. Well, I almost fell off my chair, because, of course, Agnes Varda was one of my cinematic heroes. And so we watched The Gleaner with her. And I think it was the first screening in New York, even before it went to the commercial movie house. And Agnes Varda, as all Toby's guests do, led a discussion of the students. The thing that was most stirring for me in those 10 years of dealing with Toby and her adventures and the people she brought in the films was getting to know her and meeting Dan and catching on that they really are citizens of the world, but also reading the papers that Toby had her students write, reaction papers, she calls them. And maybe some of you wrote some of the papers that I read in some of the semesters. And Toby really brought the world and new worlds and new ways of being in the world and looking at the world to the students of the new school, and she continues to do so. So on behalf of the new school and New School University, I'm delighted that Toby and Dan are here to launch her remarkable book. Thank you.
Gina. Thank you. Well, it makes me sound rather like a truant and not being able to fulfill my obligation and have a syllabus on time, but it allows me a great deal of flexibility, just as the title of my course does, a very modest title, The Human Condition Seen Through Film. So you can imagine the leeway that gives me in choosing courses. There usually is some logical sequence, but since catalog copy has to be in virtually a half year before the semester, I can't really foresee what I'm going to see in the oncoming 6 months. So I do hand in something to look decent at least, and the students by now know that they're all subject to change. I say that at the beginning of the class. I also point out that there are 2 exit doors in the class and that they're free to leave whenever they want. Since every film I show is not perfect, but they are all provocative and interesting. So there is immediately a very free atmosphere in that room. And I do think that education should be very mobile, very flexible. I really detest the idea of a professor whipping out that same old curriculum, even inserting the jokes that they might want to tell, year after year after year. And we have never played a film twice. I must correct myself. This semester, I decided that I often make reference to a film, assuming that everyone has seen that film. But obviously, if somebody is 19 years old, I can't expect them to have seen all the things. So this semester, we're having kind of touchstone films, landmark films, some of them very well known, but some of which I think are so special that I've included them in that pantheon of films. But the New School has always prided itself on this free flow of professors who come and go. They're not worried just about tenure. They're not worried about holding on to their curriculum and to their textbooks. So I think the New School started out with that premise, that there was a free flow of teachers and the teachers could do their own idiosyncratic thing, which made it a very rich event. Now, originally, I was told until yesterday that this was going to be an interview situation. An interviewer has not appeared. I feel comfortable with that. What I plan to do is read a couple of sections from the book, not too many, and then there'll be a free discussion with Dan and myself, and people can ask us all kinds of questions. Let me ask, is there anyone here who was a New Yorker attendant, a patron of the New Yorker? Oh, well, then we have some commonality. And for those of you who haven't, this book is a curious amalgam of what goes on inside a movie house. How does a movie house run? What happens before it opens? What happens in the projection booth? All these things relating to the mechanics. It's like a workbook, the mechanics of a theater. At the same time, The New Yorker ran from 1960 to 1973. And this was a very fiery period in our history, the 60s, politically, cinematically. So it's about the 68 events as well. I was teaching at Columbia at the time. And at another point, Dan and I happened to be in Paris when the 68 events erupted there. So it's about that period of political and historical information. So it's inside a movie house. It's about the political events surrounding the whole zeitgeist of that period. And since this was an Upper West Side theater, at the time that we opened, the West Side was considered the chintziest part of town to live. We had a daughter who was going to a school on the East Side, and her playmates, the mothers of her playmates, didn't want her to cross town to play on the Upper West Side. Of course, in that fairly brief interval, we know what an explosion that has been. After we closed the New Yorker in '73, a couple of years later, we actually closed the New Yorker because we wanted to embark on distribution. Running a movie theater is called exhibition. Distribution relates to the dissemination of the film throughout the country, and sometimes people get world rights. So it has to do with getting the film around so that people see it. They're two distinct things. We went into distribution and ceased for a little while having a theater. Then our next theater was the Cinema Studio, which was, I keep saying is, because I see that phantom movie house, on 66th Street and Broadway, where there's now a Barnes & Noble. And when we came to that area, at night it was a total ghost town, except for Lincoln Center, nothing. Well, I shouldn't say nothing. Alongside the theater was a little coffee shop where George Balanchine would have his afternoon soup, barley and mushroom soup. And then on the other side, there was a funeral parlor where purportedly Rudolph Valentino had laid in state. So that was that area. It was totally dark at night. Now we have the Lincoln Plaza Cinema, and that's a theater. You have to go down like into a cavern to see the movies. And of course now everything, there's so much surrounding it. Amsterdam Avenue, I don't know if any of you live on the Upper West Side, but Amsterdam Avenue, Columbus Avenue, I had small tradesmen. It was a totally different population. It was, at the beginning, a kind of tricky neighborhood. You had drugs on the side streets. You had ladies of the street parked in front of Party Time. So it was a very different kind of neighborhood than it is now. With those few words, I'm going to embark a little bit on some excerpts from the book. What kind of work is running a movie house? My father-in-law asked. Who knew? Not us, until we opened the New Yorker. It ran through the 60s and early 70s, a golden age in cinema, turbulent in politics, French New Wave on our screen, 68 uprisings at Columbia University. An Upper West Side hub became, as Bernardo Bertolucci dubbed it, a kind of wild cinema university, like Henri Langlois' Cinematheque in Paris. We were young film buffs, learning as we went, not knowing where we were going. The theater is gone, but its marquee still glimmers in my mind. As we shaped it, it shaped us. Movies, moviegoers, our own lives, unspooled on one ongoing reel. The New Yorker became our anchor where time and place converged. I thought it would go on forever. So this is the beginning of the book, the genesis of it. I don't discuss actually how we obtained the New Yorker. We had come back from a year in Spain, our year of Wanderlust, with 2 little children. I was teaching at Columbia and doing translations, and Dan at the moment was unemployed, and then he began writing a column for the Progressive magazine. And my sister mentioned that her accountant was about to buy a theater on Broadway called the Yorktown and convert it into a Spanish house, a Hispanic theater. And she said, well, maybe you ought to meet with him, which we did. And we proposed that we open the theater as a revival house, that he give us a year to experiment with it, and take it from there. So that's how it began. And the Yorktown furnished some of the letters for the New Yorker. We were very frugal. Above the marquee was a relief of Diana the Huntress with her hound, and it was a very old-fashioned kind of marquee. Our first show on March 17th, 1960, was Henry V, starring Laurence Olivier and a chorus advising its audience to eke out our performance with your mind. It's a good quote. To eke out our performance with your mind. What better counsel for the rapture of art? Co-featured was The Red Balloon, a fantasy about a Parisian boy's friendship with a red balloon and then soaring into the heavens. The program ran for 3 weeks. As people lined up, we too were soaring. Shortly before noon, we stood in the empty theater, hall dark and quiet, seats unoccupied, screen blank, an air of stillness pervading an Edward Hopper kind of space. Moviegoers began drifting in, seats filling, the screen came alive. As a revival house, we showed American movies along with others that had English subtitles at the bottom of the screen. The kind of films our kids' friends didn't care to see, even without paying. To this day, I find it exhilarating to slip into our movie theater for free and without waiting online. On Monday, the Andrews sisters might be crooning, "Don't sit under the apple tree with anyone else but me," while on Tuesday, Emil Jannings would weep for his unattainable Blue Angel, and on Wednesday, Hyper Harpo, boozy W.C. Fields, or deadpan Buster Keaton might be doing their stuff. I, one-time acrobat and tap dancer, was smitten by Keaton's rubber band stunts and loved standing in back of the theater when we played a comedy, listening to the laughter, a crowd's laughter more restorative than attending church or temple. Make 'em laugh, enjoins Donald O'Connor in Singing in the Rain. And in Preston Sturgis's comedy, Sullivan's Travels, a chain gang audience in a dirt-poor rural African-American church escapes their confinement by roaring over the antics of Mickey Mouse and Pluto. I could always locate Dan by his bursts of laughter as he sat in the audience watching W.C. Fields. It was a one-screen theater, unlike the numerous multiplexes now. In a scene in Andy Hall, Woody Allen is standing on line with Diane Keaton inside the cinema studio to see The Sorrow and the Pity. That's the Au Fools movie about the French during the war, during the Second World War, and right after it. Their claim to resistance, which in fact was a myth. And, well, Woody Allen and Diane Keaton, they're getting bent out of shape by pontificating pseudo-intellectual in front of him. Somebody was standing right in front of Woody and carrying on in a very fancy cinematic way, and he was not pleased with that. When the pseudo drops the name of Marshall McLuhan, Woody triumphantly produces the real McLuhan from behind a review stand in the lobby. McLuhan promptly denounces the puffed-up pseudo as knowing nothing about his work. If only life were like this, Woody says to the camera. And he didn't stage it. Then I go on and tell how the theater was a family store. Dan was doing the programming. Every theater needed a matron, whether children came or not, and I was the matron. In order to be a matron, you had to go down to the Board of Health and get an x-ray that you were tuberculosis-free, which I was. So I was the matron. My mother was the woman behind the candy stand. And my father stood there in the lobby as a kind of vigilante to make sure that nobody weird entered the theater. Although weird people did enter the theater. I see somebody nodding. She reminds me of when we played Samurai, Seven Samurai, a host of patrons, should we dignify them with that word? Patrons were passing food around and passing joints around. We don't like to go down in history for that. In its anonymous dark, one had a sense of being alone, though right alongside sat a CUNY or New York University student, some director or would-be director, a star or has-been star, or an enthusiastic dyed-in-the-wool cinephile. Could be Zero Mostel, Vincent Canby, Jonas Mekas, Andy Warhol, Alfred Kazin, Robert Wilson, or a neighbor come out of the cold in winter or the heat in summer. In the dark, as they say, all cats are gray. All privy to what Jean-Paul Sartre called the frenzy on the screen, or what art historian Eli Ford described as the commotion experienced on observing the relationship of a piece of black clothing, a piece of black cloth to the gray wall of an inn. Commotion, that's in italics, the etymology of it. Collectively being moved by a moving image. Each spectator viewing the same screen, each devising his or her own dream. Had Don Quixote attended a movie theater and seen Battleship Potemkin, rather than burying his nose in books of chivalry, what phantasmagoria might have erupted? In the vestibule, we had red banquettes, which came originally from the old Roxy Theater. There was mirrors on the wall, and on the inner door leading into the theater was a Jules Feiffer mural of spectators glued to the screen. And in fact, when we closed the theater, Bertolucci was so crazy about that mural that we gave it to him, and he still has it in his apartment. On Monday nights, we had a film series. And these were a series, often a week, of a particular director or a particular actress, or something that was revived that hadn't been shown and was a little offbeat. And they all had program notes. In fact, the program notes are in this book. And the program notes were written with what I call movie mavens. Well, Jules Feiffer was one of them, Jack Gelber, Robert Brustein, Jack Kerouac, Doc Humes. And they were very interesting because they were approached in a very imaginative fashion. And Peter Bogdanovich, who also wrote some of the program notes, actually sold his own program notes in the lobby for what, 25 cents?
5 cents.
For 5 cents. The most successful film in our series was Triumph of the Will, which hadn't been shown in the United States for years. On the evening of June 27th, 1960, a line formed around the theater. Students from Columbia University, eager to see that legendary film of the 1934 Nazi Party rally, shot in the Nuremberg Stadium by Leni Riefenstahl with unlimited funds. Hitler descends from the clouds. moves through the streets, and before sig-heiling multitudes, launches into his brainwashing tirades. There was such an overflow, we had to hold an impromptu midnight screening. Isaac Bashevis Singer, who happened to be passing by with a young woman, unaware that the murderous Führer was drawing crowds, beamed. I can't imitate his accent, but how wonderful to see people line up for culture and not for bread. By the way, when I was referring before to films that I assume everyone in the world has seen, a very almost 4-year-old's notion of the universe, that whatever they've done, everyone else has done. Triumph of the Will is one of the films that I'm going to be showing next week, in fact, on Tuesday. And I invite any of you, if you're free, to come and see it. It will be, the class meets at 12. We'll probably, I'm showing Night and Fog by Alan Renee, which was the first documentary made after the Holocaust, and quite an exceptional work because it's a short film. You don't see one corpse, you don't see one grave. It's a very unusual presentation of this horror. And then I'm showing Triumph of the Will. So if you are free, and somebody at the door says, "Who are you?" just say that I've invited you, because it is an opportunity to see it.
Where is it?
It's in the main building, 12, room 404.
That's 12 o'clock?
Pardon me?
12 noon? 12 o'clock?
Yeah, the class begins at 12, but we have papers that are read and busy work before we begin. If you come at 12:15, you won't. And the following week, actually, I'm showing a very extraordinary film that isn't considered a landmark. It's called Birthplace, and it's also about someone of Polish descendants whose parents were killed in a small village in Poland, and he goes back to find out where the father's grave is, and what were the circumstances, and who were the people who killed him. So as you see, though my schedule sounds a little capricious and perhaps up in the clouds, there is a sequence. I'm going to read a section now. Naturally, since we were in distribution, we formed rather close relationships with many of the directors that we distributed. We were the first ones who distributed Fassbinder. We were the ones who distributed Ozu, the great Japanese master, Herzog, many of the Godards. And this one is about Jacques Tati. One day in August 1970, Jacques Tati phoned from the Waldorf Astoria, where he and his party were staying. He had an idea. When Tati had an idea, one saluted. We invited them for lunch the next day at Gino's, a favorite haunt of ours on Lexington Avenue and 62nd Street. Waiters all Italian, food lusty Sicilian. The New Yorker had played all of Tati's work. In his films, it is neither rain nor shine that holds him up, but just about everything else. There's no story, no stars, no close-ups, just visual gags galore, as in Chaplin or Keaton. And here's a quote from Tati. "In real life, we don't stand on top of people's noses," he insisted. Jour de Fête, opened in 1949, is a silent film about a long-legged, slightly pop-eyed village postman bicycling on his route and bumping into every corner, a send-up of the ever-reliable mailman, come rain or shine. "Hulot is an inclination to be," said André Bazin. Bazin was the editor of a very famous film journal that appeared in France called Cahiers du Cinéma, and he was also a very important critic, especially with the French New Wave. He was kind of a mentor to many of these directors like Truffaut, Godard, many of the French directors. And Mr. Hulot's Holiday, 1953, is about a gangly bachelor, Tati, vacationing at a seaside resort in Brittany. The lobby is an island of calm, dialogue at a minimum. One hears the wallpaper patter of summer folk solemnly going about the business of enjoying themselves, until one man blows in, triggering a series of mishaps involving a waiter, a tin kayak, and more. After the success of Mon Oncle in 1958, Tati became fed up with Monsieur Hulot. He inched toward a new kind of cinema, a supremely democratic film that would star everybody, in which the wonders of modern life relinquish their functionality and become a ravishing backdrop to pure human delirium. Tati's journey took 10 years in all. He was a very obsessive filmmaker, always requiring perfection, building his own sets, going invariably over budget. So that journey took 10 years in all. A massive set known as Tativille was built in Saint-Maurice at the southeast corner of Paris. 100 construction workers made 2 buildings out of 11,700 square feet of glass, 38,700 square feet of plastic, 31,500 square feet of timber, and 486,000 square feet of concrete. That blows the budget immediately. Tativille included its own power plant and approach road. Building number 1 featured a working escalator, the result of Tati's exploration, ignominy, and bankruptcy. But he was secure in the knowledge that with Playtime, 1970, as his film about everybody came to be called, he had made a masterpiece. Anyway, the following day, that August, Tati arrived with bells on, gangly body enveloped in a dapper white suit, plus wife and secretary. We ordered a bottle of Chianti. Tati's patter and jokes flowed faster than the wine. This was a voluble fellow, not the silent one of Jour de Fête. A one-man orchestra, every part of his body punctuated a barrage of words. Long arms flailed like a windmill in wild gesture, head bobbed on a rubber band neck. A flashcard of expressions darted across the face of this marionette free of strings. Wife sat silent, contriving a faint smile at jokes undoubtedly heard 1,001 times. The younger woman, secretary and co-handler of Tati, his exuberance required more than one, smiled indulgently. And here was Tati's idea. He was going to open traffic in a special way. He himself, 6 feet 3 inches, in white gloves and uniform, with gold-starred epaulets, would manage the queue that formed outside the theater. Of course, he said, waving his arm like a baton, the line will be enormous. Dan and I exchanged glances. We couldn't believe our luck to have the amazing Tati, creator of Jour de Fête, Mon Oncle, Parade, Monsieur Hulot's Holiday, this genius who wrote, directed, and acted in his own films, offering himself as guardian of our line. A total role reversal. Cinema Tati, bungling, bumping into walls and people, capsizing from bicycle, totally accident-prone, and unfit for the absurdity of convention, now in real life, controlling a line. His strategy on maintaining a steady queue in Paris was to have people buy a ticket, enter the theater, then emerge, and rejoin the line. He described the current scheme in detail, marquee, the color of the lights, even the trailer. We were talking to a pro. Finally, he began describing the deal. Not unlike other great comedians, Fields, Chaplin, Groucho Marx, Tati had a keen interest in money, though his films inevitably went over budget due to his policy of absolute control. With arms gyrating faster and faster and speech increasingly fevered, he began explaining the intricacies of his proposal. Just at that moment, the uniformed waiter emerged from the kitchen, balancing a big plate of spaghetti marinara. Unsure of whose order it was, yet hesitant to interrupt the rambunctious scene, he glanced at me discreetly. I signaled it was Tati's. As the waiter leaned over to deliver the steaming dish, Tati's arm hurtled up, hit the bottom of the plate, and the whole squirming scarlet mess fell on his shoulder, sauce streaming down and dripping on his neck. Dan's eyes, normally large, turned outsize. It was one of those believe-it-or-not situations, a scene straight out of a Tati, everything amiss movie. The waiter broke into an effusion of Italian, reminiscent of the waiter in Monsieur Hulot's Holiday, while Tati's wife and I, like emergency nurses, applied our napkins. The jacket, a disaster, was carried into the kitchen, and another came forth, the sort held in reserve for customers who arrived without one. Those were the days when gentlemen had to wear jackets in a restaurant. Of course, it was too short for Tati, reaching just to his navel, wrists dangling inches out of the sleeves. His wife's composure was broken. This apparently was the only suit Jacques had in his luggage. Tati looked unfazed. Like Monsieur Hulot, there was an almost philosophical acceptance of the random chaos and absurdity of life. After lunch, like solicitous parents sending a child off to school, we set Monsieur and Madame Tati and their companion into a taxi and agreed to meet at the New Yorker the following day. The phone rang when we got home. In congested traffic, their taxi had had a small incident and banged into another car. Had their driver been distracted by some of Tati's shticks? The drivers insulted each other, exchanged license plate numbers and insurance carriers, and finally the Tatis, like the mail in jour de fête, were delivered to their hotel. But an hour and a half later, we got another call. A thief had broken into their room and stolen all their money, which Madame Tati had hidden in a garment. She announced that they would be returning to Paris on an evening flight. It was a Tati script. Life is a series of annoyances, everything capsizing, nothing going as planned, but nothing surprised Tati. And the last section I'm going to read is really inside stuff. It's called payoffs. There's a price for everything in our society, a fellow passenger on a plane once remarked. And as Karl von Clausewitz, the military strategist, once pointed out, morality has nothing to do with money, power, or politics. All cities in the world experience corruption. And who knows, but the commerce of large ones might collapse without an intricate system of payoffs. Higher levels of corruption may exist in Mexico City, Sao Paulo, Cairo, and Palermo, but Manhattan was by no means innocent. Dan learned this bitter truth within hours after opening the New Yorker. Given the number and myriad complexities of city codes, it seemed unavoidable. If city officials wanted to pull out all the stops, the place might come to a halt. Let's say a hapless young man drifts into the occupation of fireman or cop so as to retire at an early age, and since all aren't Boy Scouts, a 20-year stint may offer endless opportunities for little hits here and there. These little scores spiced up the week. It all boiled down to a question of slipping the right amount to the right guy at the right time. The New York City Fire Code has over 1,000 pages with thousands of written specifications pertaining to public places and public assembly. Those specs were the nuts and bolts of violations and could, unattended, lead to fines and ultimate shutdowns. Dan got introduced into the byways and intricacies of corruption while operating the New Yorker. When at first he came across this racket, it upset him. Why should he have to put a fixer in some beefy palm because Mr. Uniform gave him the glad eye? But when hit with violations, all 20, he coughed up. A very small gratuity could persuade the guy to overlook once or twice, but Mr. Uniform kept coming. After all, he too was in business. Dan found himself spending more time curing violations than in programming and promotion. While trying to fall asleep at night, his brain was besieged by cops, firemen, stairwells, doors, balconies, and fire escapes, a new arsenal that began crowding out Carl Dreyer, Howard Hawks, Godard, and Sturgis. There must be other ways. He considered speaking to our lawyer, Robert Montgomery, about this problem, but realized that our dear friend was the straightest of arrows and nothing would come of such a conversation. Then there remained but one solution: consult a corruption maven. Rolando Martin immediately came to mind. A Cuban superintendent, he lived in the same building on 89th Street as our friends Sally and Chandler Broussard. Occasionally he did odd plumbing and carpentry jobs at the theater, and sometimes sent a Cuban immigrant looking for work. This short, squat man, with the build of a Basque wrestler, an everglade of shiny black hair, and an ebony mustache 2 inches high, acted as fence for various transactions at Benny's Luncheonette. I don't know if you, who remembers this. This was a coffee shop at the corner of 89th and Broadway, very close to the theater, and it was really a hangout. People would come for their morning coffee, and they got to know each other. It was kind of, the equivalent of a cafe, but it sold coffee and hot dogs and hamburgers. And Rolando also had the knack of converting a $35 parking ticket into $17.50. Stored in one corner of his basement was a bevy of hot goods. In another, he held hot poker and blackjack games with a group of fellow-loving aficionados of cockfights in New Jersey's Cuban neighborhoods. Rolando was a born fixer. A student of the workings of corruption, he could size up a deal in the blink of an eye. In short order, he taught Dan some tricks of the trade. A bank night drop in a police car warranted $2. Every night in a movie theater, the receipts are deposited in a bank, and a neighborhood cop would happily do this for $2. A fireman on a few minor violations could be headed off for $15. But a license renewal at the downtown fire department was pricier, a caper that had to take place at fire department headquarters and in person. One day, Rolando accompanied Dan downtown and ran him through the ropes. Several hundred firemen, seated at desks a few feet apart in a vast open room, like in Orson Welles' The Trial, presided over license renewals and violations. It was really a Kafkaesque kind of scene, a room larger than that, all these tables, all these bureaucrats seated there. Rolando, before entering and approaching one of these desks with our application, performed a kind of origami, tucking a neatly folded $20 bill into an inch-wide cardboard matchbox between matches and back cover. With a wink at the fireman, he purred, "Smoke?" A silent signal flashed from eye to eye. "Sure, why not? Here, use these matches." Punto final. But one day a major problem arose. A fire inspector came up with a significant violation and wrote up a fault on the iron fire escape outside an exit door. The cost of replacement was prohibitive, over $10,000. Nothing was truly wrong with the fire escape, but the inspector pointed to a few rusty sections and claimed iron corrosion. All that had to be done was to paint these with Rust-Oleum, but he claimed that the entire fire escape was damaged and gave us 2 weeks to replace it. Dan studied the face of this well-dressed, articulate man in his mid-30s and divined that he could be bought off for $20, $50, or even $100. The guy came across as the real thing, an honest-to-goodness sheriff out to nail us. Whereupon Dan asked the inspector if he would please wait a few moments so he could speak to his maintenance man. Immediately he fetched Rolando, who quickly sized up the deal, walked with the inspector into the alleyway, chatted, took his name and home phone number. After the inspector had left, Rolando told Dan that this honcho could be bought off, but he wasn't exactly sure for how much. Well, Rolando had a contact man in the fire department whom he would phone. 2 days later, all was organized. The fee was $500. Dan gave Rolando the cash. Rolando painted the fire escape with Rust-Oleum. A week later, the violation was cured. So this is kind of some of the stuff that happens in a movie house. It isn't simply going in and the pictures on the screen. There's a lot. For example, our upstairs men's room was a happy haven for gay guys in the neighborhood. And even a colleague of mine, I was teaching at Columbia University, found it a favorite haunt. The projection booth had to be guarded very carefully because there was change of reels, so the projectionist must never sleep. But much of the book goes into some of the directors that we had contact with, like Fassbinder, Godard, and films that we love, particularly the Ozu films, which we still watch and rewatch. I tell my students, and I really insist on it, if a work is a work of art, the first time is like just stepping into the brook. Each time that you look at it, re-see it, revive it. Revive means to relive. Each time you revive it, it's a much richer experience. Also, there were a lot of, this was the moment of the new wave. So Andrew Sarris, whose name may be familiar to the film critic, Andrew Sarris, and Eugene Archer, who was a then reporter at the New York Times, were evangelists of the auteur theory. Does anyone not know what the auteur theory is? It means that the director is the one whose vision dominates the work. It's not the actors, it's not the sets, it's not the costumes, so that you can easily recognize a film by the imprint of the director. And that's, auteur means author. He's the author of the film. So Andrew Sarris, I have a section on Andrew Sarris. Pauline Kael, Dan got into a correspondence with Pauline while she was living on the West Coast, programming a theater there. And he edited a film anthology, which is still used in classrooms. And Pauline was one of the people in that anthology. So they would exchange remarks on where is the print. Getting a print is not easy if you have a revival house and keep changing your programs. So they were very helpful to each other. But Pauline really wanted to be a critic, a film critic. And Dan encouraged her. She came to New York. Originally, she got a spot on McCall's magazine, and then finally got that wonderful niche at New Yorker magazine, which she occupied for decades. There's a section on Pauline. There's a section on Manny Farber. Is that a familiar name to anyone? Manny Farber was a very offbeat critic, especially of B movies. And he was a big pal of my mother at the candy stand. So he would hang out at the candy stand. And since he already knew this movie that was on the screen, he would suddenly bolt away from her and go into the theater to catch a particular screen. Who was holding the cigarette at that moment? What was the framing shot at that moment? And his criticism was extremely interesting. If any of you really are cinephiles, you'll get much pleasure out of reading his works. Who have I omitted amongst the critics? Manny, Pauline, Andrew Sarris. Vincent Canby, who was then the critic of the New York Times. Pardon me? Stanley Kaufman, yes. He was with New Republic. He also was Richard Schickel. You know, I could go into my memory. It was a learning ground, actually. The kids from Columbia came down to see films. A woman here told us that she was at NYU and she would come uptown, probably cutting a class or two, to see a program at the New Yorker, especially the Monday night series where they could see things that were quite offbeat. So it was a stamping ground for critics, for young people, for older people who were seeing revivals. And then when we went into distribution, as I say in the book, we had no notion of where we were going to go when we opened the theater. We didn't have a plan. We didn't have a business plan. And we got into distribution in the same serendipitous way. We wanted to play a film by an unknown young Italian director called Bernardo Bertolucci. The producer in Italy wasn't about to relinquish that film to one little movie house on the Upper West Side. He said, in order to play this, you have to distribute it. We had no notion of what that involved, but we said, okay, we'll distribute it. And that's how we got into distribution with Bertolucci's first film. And it's really a very 60s film, very 60s. Many of the films that we distributed were very much of the era. The New Wave, the Latin American Cinema Novo, especially in Brazil, filmmakers in Germany, filmmakers in the Scandinavian countries. And then later on we nurtured, I should say, Dan really nurtured from script a film that Louis Malle wanted to do called My Dinner with Andre Gregory and Wally Shawn. And this played...
Is everyone familiar with the film, or no? Okay.
Those of you who aren't, and I see that there are some young people back there who I envy because they haven't seen some of these things, you can probably Netflix My Dinner with Andre. It's a very curious film. It's just these two guys sitting in a restaurant. Every once in a while, a waiter flits by, and they discuss their different positions of life. Andre Gregory is kind of this idealistic Don Quixote, and Wally Shawn is this down-to-earth, practical Sancho Panza, and it goes back and forth like that. And it's very charming. The dialogue is very charming. So, as I say, we went to film festivals. We would see a film that we liked very much. And since we were a modest company, we would put a modest bid on it. And we really discovered and introduced new filmmakers that way. And very often, once they were discovered and had gotten good write-ups, they would move on to larger companies, Sony, Miramax, Fine Line, and so forth. But we did have the pleasure and the gratification of bringing them to this country. Dan, do you want to say anything before we open it?
I think, you've said you've covered a lot of ground. I think that, incidentally, with Tati, before the encounter in New York, we were in Paris, and among several things that we were doing there with other films, other filmmakers, he organized screenings of all his films for us. And he rented out a theater in a strange part of Paris where there are very few people walking on the streets. And he showed us his films in sequence, one day after the other. And he came, the two of us were alone in the theater. He sat at the back of the theater to say, you were about to see this film. As the credits rolled on, as his name came on the screen, he applauded himself. And then he vanished, and then we met at the end of the film, and we had lunch with him virtually every day. He came with his wife and his assistant, and of course they couldn't get a word in edgewise. And he was quite something. He was a genius. He really was one of the great filmmakers.
A mighty ego, and deservedly so. He had a mission, he had a vision, and he really slaved in every way to bring his films to it was more than a 9-month pregnancy for all of his films. Shall we hear from people out there?
You have a question?
Yes.
A quick announcement, then a question. What is being described as a restored version of Monsieur Hulot's Holiday will be coming to the Film Forum starting on November 20. They've got a great print, I hear, and I will see of Red Shoes right now.
Thank you.
My question is, I'm one of your former patrons, and I remember...
New Yorker.
Say what?
At the New Yorker.
Of course. Oh, yeah.
Because we had other theaters.
Yes, I know. And I'm wondering if you can address it later. Have you had the same corruption problems at Lincoln Plaza? But anyway. When we left the New Yorker, there were several photographs above the doors. Do you know what happened to the photograph from the final scene of City Lights?
Oh yes, of course. Photograph of
You
him with a rose,
Yeah.
and looking at
Chaplin and Virginia Cheryl.
Yeah.
Yeah, what happened?
Well, I have a smaller version of it in my house, but I have to tell you, I was very sad when we closed the theater. And that was the only moment when I considered divorce. There was no reason to close the theater except that once he knows how to do something, he gets tired of it, he gets bored, and wants to move on to something else. We didn't repeat programs. And on his behalf, I have to say that we were already involved in distribution, and it was very hard to commit ourselves totally to distribution and at the same time have these revolving programs. So I was in mourning when the theater closed, and I had to be one of the signatures, my signature when we sold the theater, and it was with great bitterness. But, you know, in retrospect, it was a good thing because other theaters came to birth, the Cinema Studio, and then I don't know if you remember the Metro Cinema, which was further up on Broadway, which became a landmark theater, and then finally the Lincoln Plaza. So the Lincoln Plaza is quite different than the New Yorker, and as I say, when we opened the Cinema Studio and even the Lincoln Plaza, that neighborhood was a barren neighborhood. So, you know, we helped to make the neighborhood, and we could not have done up at the New Yorker what we're able to do at the Lincoln Plaza. And I imagine that many of the patrons from there have followed us downtown. Yes?
I hate this thing. First of all, you were not the only one who mourned
Yes.
the New Yorker. There's a whole bunch of us still to this day. I have two questions. One is, and that's addressed to both of you, what strikes you, if you could at all, in a palatable way, a film that you want to distribute? What element? And because you've discovered so many directors we did not know about, so what about the film or the director? And part two is, what's happened to cinema, world cinema? I mean, if you look at, you know, there's not Sajati Rai around. I mean, I can, you know, Louis Malle, I mean, I can list the whole directory of who you represented. What's going on with cinema now?
Why don't you take that?
Okay. The first part of your question about what attracts us in a film for us to want to take it on, I don't know the answer to that. It's without wanting to seem a little pretentious, there's something about a wonderful film that's almost religious, that has a kind of an ecumenical quality to it. And I don't know that, I have never seen or read, I've never read or heard an accurate description of what constitutes art. I don't know what art is. I don't think anybody knows what art is. It's magical. And that you can say that about a film. It could be this. It could be a character like Michel Simon in Boudou Saved from Drowning, or in his other great film La Talente. It could be in the case of My Dinner with Andre, which we saw recently at a private screening. And it was the first time we had seen the film since 1981 when we launched it at the Lincoln Plaza. Incidentally, about that, the film started off very slowly, and I was so involved in that film that I even though the grosses were beginning to decline, I decided to hold on to it. And some colleague that we worked with in Paris told me that word of mouth kicks in on a film after 12,000 people have seen it. I don't know how they came up with that figure, but in the 10th week, roughly 12,000 people had seen it. And by God, the film just took off after that. It ran 53 weeks. And I'll get to the second part of your question in a moment, which was something that happened a few times with some of our films. The Marriage of Maria Braun, for example, ran 52 weeks.
Aguirre.
Aguirre didn't run that long, but it ran for had a fairly strong run. Buena Vista Social Club ran for a full year. That can't happen anymore. I mean, the landscape has changed totally. So the thing about about My Dinner with Andre is that the film, upon seeing it 25 years later, I realized what a great work of art it is. It's an undefinable thing. I mean, these two guys are talking, they're serious. I mean, they're saying some serious things. They're talking about, if you'll permit me to say it, the zeitgeist. And there's under that it's leavened with some humor. And it's why did this film work the way it did?
You know, I have an additional thing to add. Say you go to a museum and you've wandered through several galleries, and as you're wandering, a painting that you saw before still sticks in your visual field, and then you want to go back and look at that film. When you leave the museum, you're not going to remember 36 paintings, but you may remember 2 of them. It has had some imprint on you. And I think that a very fine film has that transfixing quality that it provokes you, it piques you, it bothers you, it's there.
I just want to interrupt to this day. Louis Malle's Fountain India does that for me, and I saw that at the New Yorker.
Yeah, Phantom India. That
yeah.
was a very long
day,
documentary that Malle did in '68, covering every region of India. And I'm not a big fan of voiceovers, but his voiceover is very interesting in that because he's describing the impressions that he has as an outsider looking in on Indian society and trying to make some sense of the revolt that was going on in Paris at the time. Let's move on to the second question, which I'm very happy to give to you.
Okay. things have changed dramatically. No, there's no question about it. And, you know, you need the skills, I guess, of a sociologist to figure out why things are different. I don't have those skills, but I can make a few comments, which is that seems to be a shortened attention span in audiences today. I don't know if this is a result of the cell phone, the internet, the onslaught of information that one has to absorb just in their daily lives. But the films have gotten, they're not as artistic now as they used to be. There still are some pretty good filmmakers around, like Almodovar and the Austrian filmmaker Michael Haneke. But I don't think that either of them are of the order of the roster of filmmakers you had in the 60s, in the 50s. Some in the 50s, we have to remember Renoir was operating in the 30s.
And Bresson.
And Bresson started in the 50s. There's nobody around like that now. And, you know, what are we going to say? This is the decline of the West, or there's no answer to that. I think we can only point to some of these things that I'm mentioning, of short attention span, of the inability to really concentrate quietly on what it is that you're looking at because of these diversionary things that are going on in our society. I'm sorry?
The digital age.
The digital age.
Yeah, well, that's certainly
Well, but
part of it.
also a great work of art requires a great artist. And who knows why somebody surfaces that has that kind of genius. Certainly we have so many film schools now that we didn't have back then. So people are learning the technology of movies. They know how to do brilliant production effects. But it still takes a kind of, the French word esprit is a very good word. It takes a kind of spirit, and that word means mind, spirit, and soul, to create something that moves you, So even though there's great technology, you know, Chaplin didn't need great technology to make his film. So it begs the question always, is history made by the zeitgeist, or is it made by an individuals who crop up? There you had Bergman, Bresson, Fellini. I mean, this wealth of, by the way, we are playing, the Lincoln Plaza, is playing Bicycle Thief in a new print. And this is a black and white movie with not a very complicated plot. And yet it's still, though I've seen that movie at least 5 times, and I'm still powerfully moved by it. So it really is a question of who the artists are at the time. Anyone? Yes?
I was wondering about a couple things. One question would be theaters that you both were particularly fond of prior to opening up the New Yorker, which I attended many times, by the way. And the other thing is, were you, and do you remain, friends with other owners of movie theaters? I mean, going back to theaters that are no longer around, the Thalia, the Carnegie Hall, Bleecker Street Cinemas, and Regency Theater Cinema 1, 2, 3. So please respond.
Yeah, all right. Where we went, there are a few parts to that question. One of the first theaters that we spent a lot of time in was called the Beverly. It was a theater on 3rd Avenue in the 50s, and at that time, the 3rd Avenue L existed. And we used to go there every week. We lived at that time, this was in the early 50s. We were living in Sunnyside. We walked over the bridge, 59th Street, went to the Beverly, and then we saw all the British films there. I Know Where I'm Going, and Stairway to Heaven, and some of the other titles. Then in the 50s also, you had a bank of theaters on 57th Street. There was the Normandy Theater, where they played Children of Paradise for a long period of time. That was 57th Street and 6th Avenue. You had Little Carnegie, which played the Bergman films. There was the Fine Arts, which was on Park Avenue and 54th Street. And we frequented all these theaters. And of course, they were all single-screen theaters, not multiplexes. The multiplex didn't exist at that time. So there was a great deal of attention to the projection and the showing of these films mainly from Europe, although Kurosawa had a number of films in some of these theaters also. So then later on, when we opened the New Yorker, and we of course had gone to the Thalia, we spent a lot of time in the Thalia. I knew the woman of the owner of the Thalia. Her name was Ursula Lewis, and she was concerned that we were going to be competitive with her. And she came over to talk to me about it because we were the new kid on the block. And she and her husband had run that theater for quite a while. They were refugees from Germany, and they started the Thalia in the 1930s, actually. And I assured her that, first of all, our programming was different than hers. We were going to bring in another segment of the audience, and that my prediction was that her business would improve, and indeed that's what happened, because we brought in people into the neighborhood, and people who didn't even know about the Thalia who went there frequently. So that's that part of it. Now, have I answered your whole?
So you were, besides the Thalia, in regular...
Oh yes, then there was a guy by the name of Sid Geffen who had the Carnegie Hall Cinema. I don't know if you remember that.
Sure.
And one of my former assistants did the programming there. You had also at that time in the age of the New Yorker, you had the Bleecker Street Cinema. And two guys, Marshall Lewis and Rudy Franke, Marshall Lewis was actually an assistant manager at the New Yorker Theater. And Rudy Franke worked with him on a Monday night series that we did. I don't think you spoke about the Monday night series. Oh, you did, you mentioned that, yeah. So they left. They flew the coop, went down and programmed the Bleecker, and they had a very interesting concept. This was the period when the French New Wave was bursting out all over the place. And they decided that they were going to take no more than 30 or 40 French films that were made in this period of the New Wave and show only those films in different combinations. In those days, everything was double bill, all year round, with no variation. Just the same 30 films in different combinations. And in a way, it became like a kind of an elite academy of the new cinema, of modern filmmaking. I thought it was a very interesting idea.
Well, in fact, the Thalia also had a kind of rotating, they played revivals over and over again, so you could get a very good sense of old
but a
movies
much wider range.
Yes.
I mean,
Do you remember the Astor Theater in Brooklyn? I grew up in Brooklyn, and I used to play hooky in high school and go to the Astor Theater,
Where
which
was
showed
it?
foreign films right next to Erasmus Hall on Flatbush between Church and Snyder. It was amazing. It was amazing.
I don't think so.
Anyone else?
Hello, and thank you very much. I really enjoyed that. I wanted to ask, what have you seen recently that's excited you? And are you watching any industry from, say, another country where you think it's really an emerging industry? Film industry.
I'll take it. I think probably one of the most exciting films I've seen is the new film by Michael Haneke. It's called The White Ribbon, and I urge you all to see it. It's going to open on December 30th at the Film Forum and at the Lincoln Plaza Cinema. And that's an unusual event because they normally don't play films that we play. And it's a film that I don't know how many people in this room are familiar with Haneke's work. I mean, he's a little tricky. He can do things that are in his attempt to define the modern psyche, if you will. He can get pretty outlandish. I don't know if any of you saw Funny Games, but it was a horrendous film. It was horrible, and it was his idea to shock the bourgeoisie by making a film like that. This film is not like that at all. This may be his masterpiece, and it's set in northern Germany on the eve of the First World War, and it's a film about male authoritarianism, and there's a lot of brutality in the film against children, women, and underneath that surface, you sense that this was the seed of Nazism. And it's a film to run to. It's really quite extraordinary. The Romanians are making some very good films now. There's a film coming in December called Police Adjective, strange title. That's quite innovative. It's a small film, but quite artistic. What else? Herzog has a new film, but it's not a very Herzogian film. I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but it's a hell of a lot of fun with John Cage. No, not John Cage. Nicolas Cage.
There's a very good documentary by Fred Wiseman.
Oh, yeah.
Called La Danse Française, about the French ballet. His films, as you know, or maybe you don't know, are very long, and they're very observational, no intrusion into this documentary. It's quite stunning. That's a very worthwhile film. And then, you know, we're waiting eagerly for February when we go to the Berlin Film Festival, and for sure, there will be things that we see. Maybe not supreme gems, but certainly films that will be of interest. Well, if we have exhausted our conversation, thank you all for coming. We enjoyed it.
I'm sorry?
You still run Lincoln Center?
We own the
Lincoln
Plaza.
Plaza. Yes, of course.
Yeah, it's still running.
Yeah.
Up and running.
Thank you very much.
You look familiar, so.
Thank you for coming, everybody.